This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Discussions at the Roundtable. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome John Lauhoff to the show. Mr. Lauhoff's eponymous consulting firm specializes in litigation support for industrial and construction accidents. He is a registered professional engineer and a certified safety professional with over 25 years of experience in civil and safety engineering. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
My pleasure, Noah. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. Let's jump into it. You've had a long career as an engineer and a safety professional, including work with some of the world's largest automotive manufacturers. Tell me about your background and how you first became an expert witness.
I already had a private pilot license, and I went to all the various branches of the military and said, I want to be a pilot. Will you send me to flight school? The Air Force was the only one that really said yes. If you pass the physical and you get commissioned, we'll send you. I went through flight school and stayed in the Air Force for 20 years and retired as a lieutenant colonel. And then I went to work in the industry. I worked for Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. 10 years with Chrysler, and I retired from there again as a safety engineer. Now, you said, how did I get into the expert witness? One day, a gentleman came into the plant and said he needed to see a spot where an accident happened. And I told him, well, that bay's empty. There's nothing there. He said, well, that doesn't matter. I just need to say I looked at the spot. And he was an expert witness. And so he told me a little bit about how all of it worked. And that sounded really intriguing because I knew when I retired, I didn't want to sit in a rocking chair on the porch. So I built myself a website and found a lot of different companies that promoted experts to attorneys. And I got registered with probably 15 or 20 of those. And business started coming in. I started my business in 2005. I only had a couple of cases before I actually retired from Chrysler, which was the end of December of 2007. Since that time, I've been averaging about one new case a month. I work both plaintiff and defense cases. Mm-hmm. It's extremely important to get a mixture like that because a lot of attorneys say, boy, I really like that, having the combination of plaintiff and defense experience. And I find that really important too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can see that your experience is almost, or it actually is literally evenly split between defense and plaintiff cases. Is that something, do you actively pursue that? Is that part of your vetting process to try and make sure that you're taking some of each? Or is it just kind of worked out that way?
It just worked out that way, really. When I'm contacted by an attorney, what I'll do is, the most important thing is, can I support the case? I'll look at it very objectively, whether a plaintiff or defense, it doesn't matter. I think you have to remain very professional, very honest.
You have, quite a deal of experience with, 70 engagements or nearly 70 engagements. As you know, there's a couple types of expert witnesses. There's consulting witnesses, and then there's also, of course, testifying witnesses. Do you have experience with both? Do you have a preference over whether you're a consulting witness or a testifying witness? And what are some of the differences?
Well, I like to be a testifying witness. And the difference is a testifying witness is the one that will actually go in front of the jury in the trial. A consulting witness is just someone who provides information to the testifying expert. I like to do all of my own research. I'm a one-man operation. By doing all my own research, I don't rely on anyone else. I read everything that an attorney sends me, absolutely every word. That's really important. I've had an attorney say, I'll send them an invoice and they'll be, wow, that's a lot of money. And I said, but you sent me a lot of material and you send it to me, that means you want me to read it. So I read it and I take notes on it. My notes are all typewritten, and I take them to any deposition that I go to. And you're also permitted to take them to trial if you're going to testify in trial. A deposition and a trial, they're not a test of memory. What they want to do is get out what you know. Now, what I've had opposing attorneys do for me multiple times is they'll ask me a question over and over again using different terminology, trying to get me to say what they want to hear, what they want in the record. And I have on multiple occasions told them, I know what you want me to say, but I'm not going to say it. And then they move on to a different line of questioning. They may come back to it, they may not.
We spoke a little bit offline, and you had told me that there are a couple types of opponent attorneys, shall we say, when you're doing depositions. And one, takes kind of a super nice guy approach, and one takes kind of a super mean guy approach. So tell me a little bit more about that, and how do you prepare for each of those approaches? And how can newer experts prepare for both of those approaches?
One, you don't know what type of attorney you're going to be up against unless you ask the attorney that you're working for, which I always do. I say, what kind of a guy is he? Most of the time, they're decent people, and they'll act like your friend. But what you've got to understand is they're really not your friend. They want you to say what they want to hear, and they feel that the more friendly that they are to you, the more relaxed you're going to be, which is true on that, but the easier it'll be to get you to say what they want. What you've got to remember is that you know more than they do. You are the expert there. They're trying to get information from you. The best thing to do is just to take a deep breath, calm down, and don't fall into their trap.
When you talk about reading all of the material, do you often find that you're given kind of a mountain of material? Is there a fair amount of it that's superfluous, or do you typically find that the attorneys are pretty good at weeding through the chaff before they give you material on the case?
Again, that depends on the attorney.
Sure.
Some will send me a lot of medical information. And now I've come to the point where I tell them, don't send me any medical information. That part doesn't matter to me. It might sound hard that I don't care how badly the person was injured, but that's for the jury. I'm just there as to why they were injured. Was it their fault, or was it the fault of a piece of equipment? Somebody else interjects something that caused the injury. That's what my task is. It's important to know the standards, not only the OSHA standards, the federal OSHA standards, but if there's specific state standards, you have to look at them as well. And then there's the ANSI standards. Now, the ANSI standards are not enforceable, but the OSHA standards are mostly updated with the ANSI standards. And then you've got the international standards, the ISO. If a piece of equipment is made overseas, then that company that made it has to make it so that it meets the U.S. standards. And all the countries that belong to the ISO list the standards that they expect equipment to be made by. So that's something else that I do, is I get into those ISO standards if the equipment was made outside the United States, make sure that it came in correctly, safely.
That's quite a large body of law. You're talking about local and national and international at times that you have to be aware of, or at least be able to quickly reference. What does it mean in your industry to be and remain an expert? How do you make sure that you continue to learn, that you continue to stay up on these things? You know, is it fairly rapidly moving, or is it something that you really have to actively stay on top of?
It's not a real fast moving situation where standards change. I've been in this so long now that I know the standards fairly well. Um, but even so, I go back and I reference the standard um, to make sure that I haven't forgot something. Now, here's something else that's really important on the standard. Um, the standard has to be written before the date of the injury. Now, which means that if you've got an injury that's 4 or 5 years old, there's a good chance that there's been some sort of an update or a modification in that standard. So, like say, if the case injury was in 2000, and you've got a standard that was written in 1999 and another one in 2003, you have to use the 99 one. And there's a lot of cases where people don't understand that. They'll just go to the whatever one that comes up first online and use that one. So you got to be careful not to fall into that trap. Like I say, the changes are minimal, but there could be some changes.
Do you feel when you are selected for an engagement that you typically have enough time to do all of the necessary preparation? You said that you like to read everything and do all of your own research. Do attorneys typically grab you early enough in the process of the case to be able to do so, or do you sometimes feel like you're scrambling?
Most of the time, I've got a lot of time. I've got sufficient time, but there are times when things come up last minute. Uh, about 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by an attorney on a Thursday, and he wanted an affidavit on Friday the next day. And he sent me probably half a dozen depositions to go through. He said, "You don't have to have anything really detailed or real specific or real long, but I need it tomorrow." So it took me 7 hours to put it together for him, and I got it to him on time. That's not the normal case. What normally you've got quite a bit of time, and what's really important is you write your report, and then you talk about your report, and actually, if possible, have your attorney read the report also. Now, they're not going to change your opinion, but there may be certain terms that are stronger than other terms that they want to have input. So I don't have any problem with putting the terms in. And as a matter of fact, we never change my opinion. They might say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Uh, as an additional uh, item in your opinion. And if I think about it, if it's valid, then sure, I'm gonna add it in. I'm human. I miss things as well as anybody else.
Sure, of course. Are you ever given kind of a bare bones outline for a report to start on by your attorneys, or are you usually writing them whole cloth?
Usually, I'm running the whole thing myself. Um, they rarely will come up with actually what they'll come up with that on their own, and then they'll usually have me approve it. When an expert is listed, the attorney has to say what the expert is going to talk about. So in that case, he'll write a paragraph or so and say, Mr. Lauhoff is going to testify to the following. And I like to know what he's saying before he says it. And
Sure.
most of the time, I get that opportunity. There have been times though uh, when I don't, and that's a question that comes up frequently in a deposition is, you know, did you write this or or did Mr. So and so write this for you? Be honest. If your attorney wrote it for you, tell me, yeah, he wrote it for me.
Tell me about your report writing process mechanically. How do you go about writing it? Do you do like an outline? Do you just kind of start from the top and go? Do you start with a summary? How do you find what's in the most effective way to write your report efficiently?
Okay. Everything that you put in the report um, really needs to be noted as to where you got that information. So it will start out with, I've been retained by so and so for to do X for this particular case. And while we're on that, the expert can say, if he's asked a question and it wasn't part of what they were asked to opine on, they can say, I wasn't asked to do that, opine on that. Even if you've got an opinion, no, I wasn't asked to opine on that. Well, don't you have an idea? Don't you have some kind of a feeling? No, I wasn't asked to opine on that. And another great question is, well, what percentage? I'm off the track here just a little bit, but I don't want to miss it. What percentage do you think company A is responsible for? The answer is there's only one answer. That's up to the jury to decide. It's the only answer you can give. So now, going back to the report format, it'll start out after the introduction, been retained by so and so to do such and such. I will then go into a background of the case, and I'll be in paragraph form, but every time I state a fact, I will state where I got it, and usually it's out of a deposition. So it'll be like Jones deposition, page 10,
Sure.
and that's very important. Um, and then after I've gone through that, I'll probably write a conclusion or a summary. Depending on the case, it will go either way, which is where I summarize things. Sometimes there are conflicting statements. I'll make a heading of conflicting statements, and I'll say Jones said this versus so and so said something else. And there's always a question. Then when you've got that, was, well, who do you believe? Well, I'm just going to call anybody a liar, but maybe based on all of the information, I side with Jones. But it's based on the information, not just because I like Jones.
A conflicting statements portion of the report. I haven't heard that before. Tell me a little bit more about that and how you use that during the deposition itself, because of course reports become your reference material during the deposition or during cross-examination.
Really, well, right now I've got a case. There was a fire. The contention from the plaintiff is that the fire was caused by sparks from a circulating saw that got up into the insulation in the ceiling. There are two people that say that they saw the defendant's company using these circular saws with the sparks flying. All of the employees of the defendant's company say that they did not have a circular saw. So, who do you believe on that? And that's some questions that I'm going to have to answer on that. And why do I believe somebody over somebody else? So you've got two on one side and three on the other side. You've always got the thought of, if somebody says something, is there going to be retribution from their employer, or is their employer going to get mad at them? Oftentimes they will say what it takes to support their employer.
So you're analyzing the situation through your expert lens and determining the most likely, in your expert opinion, of the conflicting statements that have been made. Is that about right?
Yes, it is. What's nice is usually the attorneys will have multiple experts. I would just have one section of it, and it's really important that you don't say something that's conflicting with one of the other experts. So I always like to have some kind of a Zoom meeting type of thing, or just a multiple person phone call. Uh, so we can all discuss the case, and so each one of us knows where the other's coming from. As far as the depositions are concerned, when it comes to reviewing them, the plaintiff always gives the deposition first. Defense then, the expert has an opportunity to look at that report and pick it apart.
Sure.
And then the plaintiff would have an opportunity to go back and pick the defense's report apart. Uh, Sometimes those reports are really good, and you can't pick them apart because they're written professionally, and they've got all the information to back up what they say.
Yeah, there's obviously two types of reports. There's your initial report and rebuttal reports. And because you've worked both on the plaintiff and defendant side extensively, you must have done a lot of each. What are some of the other differences between the two types of reports? And do you have a preference between the two?
First, I have no preference between the two. I always look at a case from the opposite side. And I tell my attorney, and maybe I'm off subject here, but I'm going to be the devil's advocate. If I was on the other side, this is what I would do.
In a rebuttal report, essentially you're putting yourself in their shoes and rebutting them. So no, that absolutely makes sense. But I was just asking if you had, a different strategy, maybe with the report writing itself or with the content therein when you're handling rebuttals versus initial reports.
The rebuttal report is typically a lot shorter. You don't go into any of the introductory information. It's just a matter of looking at the other expert's report, identifying what you disagree with. Not what you agree with, to leave that out, but just, I disagree with this, and this is why I disagree with it.
Let's shift over to talking about some positive experiences. You've worked with many attorneys. What are the characteristics of a good engagement? What are the things that make you and your hiring attorney a good team in an engagement?
An attorney that wants to learn and wants to listen. That's key. I think I find it a lot when I'm talking, they're very quiet and they're just listening, um, sometimes taking notes. Sometimes either they or I will interrupt the other, and I will apologize, and they'll say, "Oh no, go right ahead." They're the one that hires you is very interested in learning everything that you know, and you've got to approach it as a teacher. Neither one of you can act as the superior person. You're a team. You're kind of equals. They are experts on the legal strategies. They know what they have to do there. But before this case, they probably don't know anything about the subject matter. So you have to teach them the subject matter. When you go out on a site visit, it's important to one, work closely with your attorneys. You never want to talk to your attorney in front of opposing counsel.
Sure.
It's save all your comments till after, unless you pull them aside.
Before we wrap up, do you have any last tips for newer expert witnesses or attorneys working with experts?
Don't get all worked up about it. Just to remember that you are the expert. You know the information more than anybody else, and just explain what happened. Answer the questions honestly. Publications to a minimum, or don't do any publications. I have no publications. And the reason for that is things change. Maybe your opinion changes. And I'm always asked, do you have any publications? And I always say no. But I may have written something 10 or 15 years ago. And for whatever reason, I don't agree with what I said anymore. They're going to pull that up. They're going to find that. They're going to say, well, back 10 years ago, you said this, and now you're saying this. What's the deal here? Don't write it, do any publications.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lauhoff, for joining me here today at the roundtable.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure And you have a great evening.
And thank you to our audience for joining me for another discussion at the Roundtable. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening apps.